Okay, so, I mean, we could bring up psychology, but I'm not sure what that had to do with that. But look, so we can say, these are fine. These things are maybe working towards normalizing those types of family units. Calling them propaganda seems like a loaded way to say that. And that's fine. If you want to use loaded terms like that, you can. That's
Well, we can unload it. I agree with you. Propaganda has a negative connotation. I just don't know a better way to say it that people understand.
So you think that the normalization or the attempt to, normalize something is necessarily propaganda, or you think that there's a difference there?
No, I just said, I think propaganda has a negative connotation, like definitionally a negative connotation. But when I say the word propaganda, I think most people understand what I mean by that word, meaning there's a national campaign towards X.
A national okay. I mean, if all you're saying by a national campaign towards X is that people want people to be accepted as being gay, or people want to be seen as normal for having a gay family where they have, two parents of the same sex and children that live in that household. If that's what you mean, then sure, I'm fine with the United States doing things like putting flags on their building, but not for that purpose. The reason that I'm fine with that, something like putting a pride flag up during Pride Month, is because that's a representation of civil rights. Actually, I spoke, by the way, a little plug for my YouTube channel. I spoke at the Florida Senate about a month ago about this. It's an infringement on constitutional rights to not allow government entities to do that. Historically, the Supreme Court has ruled that way, by the way. But that is a promotion of the civil rights of those people, not a promotion of their lifestyle. Now, while it might also
wait, hang on, back up for me real quick. Did you just say that it's unconstitutional to govern for states to govern what now? Flags? Back that up. I just want to make sure I get this right.
Right. Yeah. It's so in the instances, and this is just a descriptor of historically how it's been. The Supreme Court has ruled it unconstitutional to regulate the types of speech that government entities can employ.
Government entities being.
Do you know what a government entity is?
I'm just asking you so that I understand.
I'm just curious. Like, I just didn't know if you genuinely didn't know.
You do realize that you could have proprietary definitions of things that may not. I
think it would be charitable to assume, that we're kind of using similar terms. Well, that's fine.
Well,
I think a government.
Do you mean state government? Do you mean federal government? Do you mean local government?
Historically, both. The Supreme Court.
Right. So when we say government entities, I'm just trying to untangle it. That's it.
Sure. I mean, okay. Sure. Yeah. Government entities historically, both on the federal level and the state level.
Okay. So like the Confederate flag,
historically, the Supreme Court has ruled it unconstitutional for that to be infringed upon.
Okay.
Now, the issue there can be a different argument against maybe why we shouldn't allow them to do it. Maybe it's not because it's unconstitutional, but maybe there's some other reason why we should infringe on their free speech.
Do you think we should?
On
the Confederate flag?
That would be a conversation about, what's the usefulness, what kind of violence.
No, it'd be a conversation about whether or not you're consistent in your view that because states can do this, they should be able to do this, or they should do this. Okay, that's not true. Look, what I was saying was that take the instance of, putting up can I say the word swastika? I would just say Swazi.
Swazi, yeah. I put up a nice 1942 flag up, on the state building or something like that. And that causes some riot or that causes some violence or something like that. There might be an argument there to say, well, because it's had this specific negative outcome, then we should restrict them from doing that. However, that's not the case with the symbolization of, Pride Month, the gay flags that are put up on buildings. The intention there is to represent the civil rights of those people. That would be like saying you can't put up American flags.
This is a civil rights issue on either end.
Do you think that the Civil War was a civil rights issue?
No, it's a civil rights issue on either end for the flag itself. So you can't say, so if you say, well, this is negative, right, or this is positive, just because one is negative doesn't mean it's not the same civil rights issue that you're pointing at here. So if you're pointing at states historically can't say anything, or government entities can't say anything about what types of flags are put up on is it state property? Is that what you're referencing?
Right. So government buildings.
Yeah, government buildings. Then it would still be a civil rights issue if you're saying that they shouldn't put up the Confederate flag. That would still be a civil rights problem.
When I asked you, do you think that the Civil War was a civil rights issue. Do you think that the Confederate flag represents the civil rights of African Americans?
No.
Okay, right. So that's the symmetry breaker here. And then there's also the
Well, what do you think a civil right is?
do you think that the
Don't ask me a question before you answer my question. What do you think a civil right is?
look, a civil right is, something, it's actually, I think, pretty vague in our legal language, but
Yeah,
a
so
civil right is something like a human right that most people would call
So
a
like
human
you
right.
have a right to put that flag up. Okay,
No,
great.
no.
I have a right to put that flag up too?
Okay, see, that's where the confusion is. So I'm talking about when I say, government entities have the right to put up like pride flags. The pride flag is the symbol of the civil rights of gay people to get married, own property, not be, have their house raided while they're having sex or something like that.
Well, okay. That's an assertion. So let's start with this. So you just making the claim like it is true that this flag represents this. That's great. It represents that to this group of people. I would make the same argument with the Confederate flag. Same exact argument. That's great that it represents a negative thing towards this group of people, but it represents a positive thing towards this group of people. It would be the same thing with the LGBTQ flag. It'd be the same argument both ways.
No, look, the problem here is that the condition that I gave for, it being fine for them to use this form of free speech is the fact that it represents the civil right of that group of people. But the Confederate flag doesn't represent the civil rights of who?
It would represent the civil rights of any people who wanted to see consistency so that they can have their flag up if they so chose. That would still be a civil right.
That isn't, maybe there's some vagueness on the civil rights thing, but I don't think that you think that, putting a flag up wherever you want on whatever property you want is a civil right. You don't believe that, right?
I think that if you were going to be consistent with your view, you would need to believe that.
That's not, okay, this isn't answering my question. You don't think that it is a civil right to display
I think it's a civil right if you put up a gay flag
sure
on
why you
government
interrupted me.
buildings. Well, I'm trying to answer the question because you said I wasn't answering it. If you put it up on
I
a
have to
government,
re-ask it for you to
if you
answer
put
it.
it up on a government, you didn't ask me a question.
I was in the middle of asking you the question.
You
and
said I'm not
clarifying.
getting the answer, so I was just giving you the answer.
So look, the question was, do you think that it's a civil right to see your flag equally displayed? Because that was what you started to say.
No, I think that it would be equally consistent to say if you can have an LGBTQ flag flying on some state building and that's constitutional, then you'd have to say the same thing about a Confederate flag.
That the argument was from the fact that that flag represented the civil rights of that
I mean,
group.
that's nice. What I'm telling you is that that's an assertion. Like,
That-
demonstrate the assertion.
That's an assertion based off of the Supreme Court historically ruling it that way. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not making I can make a moral claim, and we can talk about like why people shouldn't, because I think, there might be like violence ensued by one versus the other, et cetera. But
Okay, so why should you be able to have the gay flag up but not the Confederate flag?
because I think that one represents the civil rights of a group, whereas the other one doesn't. One is more likely to incite violence. I don't think that
Do
the
you
pride
think that
flag being up is more likely
do you
to
think
incite violence.
heritage is part of civil rights?
I think that do I think heritage is part of civil rights?
Yeah. When you're talking about the historical use of the LGBTQ flag, for instance, this is going to have some type of like historical meaning to the people in which that flag represents, right?
Right.
Okay, isn't the Confederate flag going to have the exact same thing? It's going to have some kind of historical meaning when it comes to family lineage for people who live in the South, for people who, they had ancestors who fought in this war, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's going to be part of their heritage and history. So don't you think that would have specific meaning to them as well?
Right, but there might, like I said, be overriding considerations, like if hanging that flag caused violence or something like that. Obviously, you would say, like, okay, if we started hanging up Confederate flags and then more violence ensued against, like, African Americans, you would say we probably shouldn't hang it, right?
So then, by that metric, are you saying that if LGBTQ flags incited violence in people who were not LGBTQ, we should not hang LGBTQ flags?